When we think about the pharmaceutical world, we often picture cutting edge science, right?
Absolutely. Innovation is key.
For sure. But underneath all that drive for new medicines, there's something else pretty significant happening.
Hmm.
It's this growing realization, this shift that even this like super regulated industry needs to think about environmental sustainability.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're seeing a really strong push towards bringing sustainable practices and, the ideas of green chemistry right into how drugs are found, developed,
And made the whole pipeline.
the whole thing. So in this deep dive, that's what we're going to explore. The environmental drivers, the genuinely clever chemistry that's coming out of this.
And you mentioned real world examples.
Yes, definitely. We'll look at some actual cases from the literature, specifically from organic process research and development, OPR&D, see how these ideas actually play out.
Okay. So for you listening, our mission here is to really get to grips with how pharma is tackling this. It's complex, but it's vital. How do they become more sustainable without, and this is the key thing, without compromising how well medicines work or their safety?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
All right. So, okay, let's start unpacking it. What are the basic pressures? Why is pharma focusing more on sustainability now?
Well, broadly speaking, it's that growing awareness of the environmental footprint,
Yeah.
things like potential pollution from manufacturing sites,
Sure.
the industry's carbon emissions, and also the risk maybe of active drug compounds getting out into the environment.
Okay, so pollution is one angle.
Yeah, and resource depletion is another. Think about it, a lot of traditional chemistry relies on materials that aren't renewable, they're finite.
Right, fossil fuels and such.
Exactly. And then there's just the sheer volume of waste. From early research, tiny scales, all the way up to massive production runs. That's got environmental costs, but also economic ones.
It sounds like a massive challenge,
Yeah.
especially like you said with the safety and quality rules. They're incredibly strict, non-negotiable really.
Utterly non-negotiable. No room for error there.
So how do they square that circle?
And that's really where green chemistry comes in as a framework.
Oh, okay.
It's not just like a vague idea, it's structured. It has these 12 core principles that offer a practical way to approach these sustainability issues while maintaining quality and safety.
Right, so green chemistry isn't just a buzzword. Let's dig into that. What are these core ideas, especially for making medicines?
It's quite systematic, actually, built around those 12 principles. Maybe we can focus on a few key ones.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, first up is probably waste prevention. I mean, the ideal goal is to design processes from the very beginning so they just don't make much waste.
Instead of cleaning it up later.
Exactly. Avoid it rather
Yeah.
than treat it. And we actually see this in practice. There's a paper in OPR&D from 2020, I think it's 2020, Addie, where they talk about reducing byproducts in a specific synthesis.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that small change didn't just cut waste disposal costs, it actually streamlined the whole process.
Mhm.
So, small tweaks, big impact sometimes.
Okay, waste prevention. Makes perfect sense as a starting point. What else?
Atom economy. It's another big one.
Atom economy.
Yeah, it sounds technical, but the idea is simple. You want as many of the atoms from your starting ingredients as possible to end up in the final drug molecule.
So less gets thrown away as like side product.
Precisely, maximize incorporation. And that ties into the next idea. Less hazardous chemical syntheses.
Meaning.
Designing the reaction pathways themselves to use and create stuff that's just less toxic. Safer for people, safer for the environment. That same OPR&D paper, 2020 OTAs, actually mentions an issue they had with corrosion of a ketone. That's the kind of undesirable thing green chemistry tries to design out.
Got it. So it's efficiency with ingredients, but also choosing safer routes deliberately.
Exactly. Then you've got safer solvents and auxiliaries. Solvents, the liquids used in reactions and other things like separation agents, they can make up a huge part of the waste stream.
Right, I've heard that. Gallons and gallons of solvent.
It can be enormous. So minimizing their use or switching to safer ones like water or ethanol when possible is key. OPR&D 2021 mentions using ethanol and THF.
THF is tetrahydrofuran.
That's the one, in a Suzuki coupling. Now, they weren't explicitly calling it green in that paper's context, but those are generally seen as better choices than, say, chlorinated solvent.
Okay, safer solvents.
Right.
What about energy? Making drugs must use a lot of power. Heating, cooling.
Oh, absolutely. And that's another principle, designed for energy efficiency. Basically, try to run reactions at normal room temperature and pressure if you can. Avoid those big energy demands.
Makes sense.
And sort of related is using renewable feedstocks.
So starting materials from plants or biosources instead of just oil.
Yeah, that's the long-term vision, moving away from reliance purely on finite fossil resources. That could be a huge shift down the line.
Definitely sounds like it. Any other key principles we should touch on?
Well, reducing derivatives is important. Many syntheses involve adding protecting groups to parts of a molecule, doing a reaction, then taking them off again.
Extra steps.
Extra steps, extra reagents, extra waste, so minimizing that is greener. And catalysis is huge.
Catalysis. Using catalysts.
Exactly. Using tiny amounts of a catalyst that can trigger a reaction over and over again, instead of using large amounts of a reagent that gets consumed. It's much more efficient. OPR&D 2020, again, they mention a specific ruthenium catalyst, rukeal RTSO, RTSD, PANs.
Wow, specific.
Yeah, used for a particular step. Using such a small amount makes a massive difference in material use. It's elegant, really. Molecular efficiency.
A tiny amount doing all that work.
Yeah.
That is elegant. What about after the drug's been used by the patient? Does green chemistry think that far ahead?
It does. That's the principle of design for degradation.
Okay.
Designing the drug molecule itself so that after it's done its job and, leaves the body, it breaks down into harmless things. It doesn't persist in the environment.
That's really thinking cradle to grave, isn't it?
It is. There's also real-time analysis for pollution prevention, basically, monitoring reactions as they happen to catch problems early.
Like process control.
Kind of, yeah. And finally, inherently safer chemistry for accident prevention. Designing processes and plants to minimize risks like spills, explosions, fires. That OPR&D 2020 paper touched on safety too. Controlling temperature carefully, handling reagents like sodium perborate safely.
Wow, okay. That is a really comprehensive set of guidelines.
Yeah.
It really gives pharma a roadmap.
It does.
Now, you mentioned those OPR&D examples. Can we look closer? How are these principles actually getting used? Theory is great, but practice.
Absolutely. OPR&D is fantastic for that, seeing theory in action. So back to OPR&D 2020, they talked about making this ester 3.
Sure.
The key change was just adding one reagent more slowly, a longer addition time.
Simple change.
Sounds simple, but it meant they didn't need to add more reagent later. And crucially, the mixture could go straight into the next reaction step without purification.
Cutting out a whole workup and isolation step.
Exactly. Less handling, less solvent, less waste. A direct application of waste prevention.
That's a great example.
Same paper, they looked at a Bayer-Villager oxidation reaction. They found adding the sodium perborate oxidant in small portions was much safer, better control over gas release.
Process safety, right?
And they also put in a step to safely quench or destroy any leftover oxidant at the end. So thinking about safety and waste together.
Makes total sense. Both are critical. Other examples?
Yeah. OPR&D 2021b, they worked on optimizing the synthesis of a compound 1. Now, their main goal wasn't explicitly stated as green, but
the result was greener.
Exactly. By finding better solvents in reaction conditions, they got higher yields, fewer impurities, less waste, less energy used. It naturally aligns with green principles, even if that wasn't the primary label.
So sometimes just aiming for better chemistry ends up being greener chemistry.
Often, yes, there's a strong overlap. Another one, OPR&D 2021c, describes screening different Lewis acid additives for an ether formation reaction.
Trying different catalysts or promoters.
Right. Looking for pathways that gave fewer unwanted side products. That hits atom economy and less hazardous synthesis principles.
Exploring options.
And one more, OPR&D 2021 mentioned that Suzuki-Miura coupling again. They used a palladium catalyst, but at a really low loading, 0.0025 equivalents. Tiny amount.
That sounds incredibly efficient.
It is. It shows how powerful catalysis can be for reducing the amount of, in this case, expensive and potentially problematic heavy metals needed.
These OPR&D examples really bring it home. It's not just academic theory. It's happening in R&D labs.
It absolutely is. It's driving process improvement.
So zooming out a bit, what about the regulators, FDA, EMA, others?
Yeah.
Are they pushing this? Maybe not mandating green chemistry specifically, but are there expectations around efficient, cleaner manufacturing kind of nudging things this way?
That's a fair assessment. While, as you say, there might not be explicit green chemistry mandates everywhere yet, the overall trend from regulatory agencies globally is towards expecting best practices.
Which includes efficiency and environmental responsibility.
Right. Better process understanding, control, minimizing impurities, demonstrating robustness,
Hmm.
all things that align well with green chemistry goals. So it's an indirect encouragement, you could say.
Okay. And what about the money side? Does going greener cost more, or could it actually save money?
That's a really interesting point. Often, in the long run, it can lead to quite significant savings.
How so?
Well, less waste means lower disposal costs, which can be substantial. More efficient processes mean less energy used, fewer raw materials consumed.
Right.
There might be an upfront investment, in research or new equipment sometimes. But over the lifetime of a process, greener approaches can definitely be more economical.
So it's potentially a win-win. Good for the planet, good for the bottom line eventually.
Potentially, yes.
And what about for patients? Does any of this matter to the person actually taking the medicine?
Well, indirectly, perhaps. Safer processes using less hazardous materials could mean a lower theoretical risk of trace impurities in the final drug. That's always a goal.
Okay, so a potential safety link.
And also, patients are consumers too. Many people care about the environmental impact of the products they use, including medicines. So knowing a drug is made more sustainably might be valued.
That raises the communication point. Are companies talking about this? Are they being transparent about their green efforts?
That's still evolving, I'd say. Some companies do report on sustainability initiatives in their corporate responsibility reports,
Sure.
but maybe there's room for more direct communication, more transparency with the public about the industry's commitment and the specific actions being taken. It's getting better, but perhaps more could be done.
Okay. So wrapping up this deep dive, the takeaway seems to be that pharma is seriously moving towards sustainability. It's driven by environmental awareness, but also the practical benefits of green chemistry.
I think that's right. We've seen how those green chemistry principles offer a real toolkit, and the OPR&D examples show they're being used to make real improvements.
It's complex, though, always balancing that environmental responsibility with the absolute need for safe, effective drugs.
It's a critical balance, but it's an essential evolution for the industry.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating area where science, responsibility, and innovation meet. And, it leaves you with a thought.
Mm.
How might focusing on green chemistry, on sustainability,
Mm.
how might that actually spark totally new kinds of innovation? Maybe looking at problems through this green lens leads to discovering completely different, maybe even better ways to make medicines we haven't even imagined yet.
That's a great point. Constraint can breed creativity, right?
Exactly. Could sustainability be a driver for the next generation of pharmaceutical manufacturing breakthroughs? Something that benefits us and the planet in ways we're only just starting to see? Definitely food for thought.